Well, it seems it's time to discuss. What's up, guys? I'm Pencil here, and here to do a breakdown/discussion on why Ryomen Sukuna, in the body of Megumi Fushiguro, could have beaten Satoru Gojo. As Satoru Gojo himself presumes in chapter 236, and a couple times throughout the battle itself. We have a pretty hefty chunk to talk about, like hefty. So I don't want to waste too much more time. So let's not waste any more time and let's hop right into it. Editing me. Are you ready? 3, 2, 1, go. What's up, guys? That guy with a pencil here. Fun fact, I do happen to have it on me and keep it on me at all times. And another fun fact, Ryomen Sukuna versus Satoru Gojo is, unironically, and I'm pretty sure undebatably, the most controversial fight in the series. And this is a battle manga, where the whole series is fighting. So I think we all know, when I say that, and I say it darn near definitively, it's a big deal. And honestly, there's a good reason why it's the most controversial, talked about, discussed, debated fight in the series. Because it kind of decided the fate for the back half of the series and was foreshadowed since what? Like chapter 1? Chapter 2? This battle's been destined to happen. So of course, as it happened, as it ran, as it's ended, after nearly a whole year since its end, obviously it's still one of the most hotly discussed and debated topics, considering what it means for the pinnacle of Jujutsu. But while I personally believe that Ryomen Sukuna is the strongest source, I made a whole video talking about that, and I'll definitely make a couple more videos talking about it, because I've seen some discussions I do want to tackle one way or another. We'll consider that one of these videos, where I'm going to talk about why I think Meguna, the incarnation of Ryomen Sukuna, in the body of Megumi Fushiguro, could have actually defeated Satoru Gojo without the 10 Shadows. Very particularly without the 10 Shadows. And you may be looking at me, and I'm looking at you, and you're looking at me, and I'm looking at you, and you're looking at me, and you may be like, Pencil Man, I know you're delusional. I know you don't have much common sense, and I know there definitely aren't all the screws tightly screwed in up there, but are you crazy? Are you nuts? Are you buku bonkers? How dare you make such a declaration? Well, I ain't the only one who makes such a good declaration. If you read chapter 236, regardless, everyone knows the statement. I'll pull it up real quick just so we can tackle it, so I can explain for the basis of it and how it sort of opened up my eyes to this discussion. Where is it, gosh darn it? Here it is. So, I was the king of curses. Man, he was crazy strong. Plus, Sukuna didn't even have to go all out. I'm not sure if I could have beaten him, even if he didn't have Megumi's 10 Shadows. There it is. There's a statement. It's what prompted the discussion in my head, prompted the discussion in everyone's head. It's what caused a whole bunch of turmoil. But let's actually just quickly glance through the fight and see where things could have been done differently that could have led to a Megumi victory without the use of the 10 Shadows. And I know this is going to sound crazy considering a lot of the fight is predicated on Sukuna using the 10 Shadows, but once again, the seeds are laid there. This statement does not come so far out of left field as I initially thought when I initially read the chapter, as many other people thought when they initially read the chapter. It actually does have a pretty solid bit of groundwork laid that is free of this statement and kind of just be inferred when you reread the fight. So we're going to leap all the way back, not necessarily to the beginning, because once again, this initial interaction doesn't show much, except it does show something. So, Ryomen Sukuna, when entirely caught off guard, and presumably not using domain implication based on what he says later in the fight, he eats a 200% hollow purple, and loses both of his arms. He reveals later on in the fight that he lost both of his curse energy reinforced arms, and by the time we see Gojo teleport to him, he's regenerating. That's it. So he reveals that when at full output and fresh, he can take a 200% hollow purple. Just remember that for later. Alright. So we'll hop right into the next chapter, which once again actually isn't too decided by the domains or by the 10 Shadows. It is just basically the warm-up, the start of the sparring match between Gojo and Sukuna. But there's one thing I do want you guys to note. When these two first start to do battle, there's specific context laid down. They start exchanging blows. Notably, they seem to be relatively even. They both soak themselves in curse energy and start to get to boxing. But then, the second they get to boxing a little bit too in-depth, Gojo immediately starts using the Limitless. And the Limitless throws Sukuna into a wall, and then throws Sukuna through a building. Note his rather blasé reactions to this, though. And he gets thrown through multiple buildings. He takes no damage from this, by the way. And then he sees Gojo stomping towards him, and then he begins to dodge and roll around. Notably, Gojo's use of the Limitless here is quite drastic, quite crazy, quite next level, but one thing you'll notice is that it does basically no damage to Sukuna. Basic applications of blue and telekinesis do nothing to Sukuna. And Sukuna sends out the initial dismantle. It seemingly either two things are debated here, and once again, I may go more in depth in this in a separate video. People aren't sure if the dismantle bounced off the infinity, or if based on Gojo's head, well, how do I put this? His head tilt back, whether he ducked it. It's hotly debated whether or not Gojo can actually see the slashes. A lot of people want to say he has to see the slashes, because the Six Eyes have to be better perception than what Toji and Maki have, and they can see the slashes. And so can Mahoraga. But still, it's weirdly debated, but regardless, you can tell that these two are showing a base of relativity. But then Sukuna shows something different. As the building collapses from the hit of the dismantle, he activates the main amplification and actually manages to touch Gojo. They end up falling through the building, they have a little bit more of an exchange, and the two come out with no damage on each other. But what this does show us, and does lay out pretty clearly, is that Meguna and Satoru Gojo are relatively even. That's a big thing that had this fight being so intense on both sides, because both characters seem fully capable of kind of ignoring each other and what they could do. Gojo through his invulnerability or the infinity, and Ryomen Sukuna just through sheer raw bulk. Like, legitimately, he takes no damage throughout this entire chapter, despite being thrown through multiple buildings with Satoru Gojo. Why did I say Satoru Go? Satoru Gojo using his curse technique. So, if that doesn't show us anything, what will show us something? Well, Let's see something. Let's take a look. Obviously, chapter 225 in this clash, in this battle of deities, is all about the introduction of the pinnacle of Jujutsu, their domain expansions. And this is Meguna's WinCon. Half of it, but a majority of the WinCon. Remember this. The factor of domain expansions is introduced in 225. And this is how Meguna could have won. If he wanted to and wasn't specifically doing something completely different to get something completely different, which is Mahoraga's blueprint in order to bypass the infinity by extending the curse technique's target, aka Shrine's target, aka the spatial slash. We see that Gojo was not informed. Bro did not know that that open barrier would do this, and even if he did know, as many people have pointed out, it's highly likely that he just didn't know how they'd interact. Sure, there's the idea that maybe he went into the battle assuming that since his own separate world likely would overlap with Sukuna's separate world, then maybe, just maybe, the overlapping of a real reality with Sukuna's open barrier domain wouldn't actually affect them, but plot twist, it did. Bada bing, bada boom, the barrier collapses. Notably, Gojo doesn't even seem to do any damage to Sukuna. They do not even interact before Gojo's domain shatters, and then he gets sliced up by the first hit of Malevolent Shrine. Now, with that being the case, this clearly lays out the fact that Malevolent Shrine is always going to beat Unlimited Void eventually. No matter what. Until, or unless, Gojo were to unlock an open barrier spontaneously in this battle, he was never going to beat Malevolent Shrine. It was simply too hard to counter. The refinement and both of their sure hits cancel each other out, so all it came down was a timer. So the main thing that you're going to have to prove is that Ryomen Sukuna, while in the Meguna form, would have the ability to stall Satoru Gojo out for a specific period of time in order for Unlimited Void to shatter, and for Satoru Gojo to be forced to, I don't know, either run away, or domain clash again, after his curse technique refreshed. Remember this for later. So, we jump into chapter 226, and we get to see something very, very, very interesting on my... Why? This is why I gotta stop consuming Deltarune content. I keep quoting Gaster. But with that being the case, we see that Gojo Satoru reveals a very important ability. The ability to survive Malevolent Shrine. Now, this is honestly another hotly debated topic. People aren't sure whether or not Sukuna was actually going all out here. Because once again, it's revealed that he does weird things in this battle in order to get the blueprint to bypass infinity. So some people have theorized that maybe this isn't the max output on Malevolent Shrine, but for the sake of it, and considering that's never directly implied, unlike a lot of Sukuna's other weird moves, I'll say this is a full up on Malevolent Shrine, which shows that Satoru Gojo could survive it. Maybe not for long, but he could survive it, as it tears him apart and pours a bunch of juice out of his system. And we see that Meguna can actually press the advantage, and whenever he does, it doesn't necessarily seem like Gojo can do much when under the effects of Malevolent Shrine. Sukuna immediately catches up to him. They start to exchange hands while Gojo's in burnout. Gojo goes for the knee kick, but ultimately gets caught by Sukuna in the grab, misses the punch, and then both resort back to neutral. And we see that ultimately Sukuna immediately realizes that he's using reverse curse technique at full throttle. That's the only way a curse techniqueless Gojo can survive Malevolent Shrine. He cannot lower his RCT output. This will come back to haunt him later when we talk about how Megana could win. But we see that Gojo then realizes that ultimately Sukuna is in the center of Shrine. Shrine is the center of Shrine. And thusly, it appears that harming Sukuna would not be the immediate way to end Shrine. And then we see new Shadow Style Symbol Domain come out from Gojo. Only for it to be revealed that new Shadow Style Symbol Domain is still, just as a regular domain would be, extremely ineffective against Malevolent Shrine. And once Sukuna puts a little bit of pressure on him, as the domain is already shattering by them existing in the same domain, bada bing bada boom, Gojo's back under pressure and is immediately forced to either re-up Symbol Domain or go back to the previous position where he's boxing full strength. Once again, need to remind you, Gojo Satoru has done no damage to Ryomen Sukuna throughout this entire encounter, except for the opening 200% Hollow Purple that he off-guarded Sukuna with. Obviously, I don't think I need to tell you that Gojo's not charging that up in a scenario where Sukuna is actively pressing him, as we see here. Notably, Gojo's not able to get a single technique off while he's in burnout, naturally. But, of course, we get to a point where he's no longer in burnout, and he finally manages to get his curse technique back, use blue in order to tackle Sukuna, get his hands all up around him, get his legs all up around him, and then point-blank blast him with a red. This is the first bit of damage done to Sukuna. Remember, Sukuna face tanks this red. He eats it raw, when he was not expecting it, admittedly well in his own domain. So he is buffed stat-wise, but still, he does eat the red. No domain amplification, but it do occur like that. It do be real when it be real. Sukuna takes the damage, Gojo starts to heal off, and he steps outside the range of Malevolent Shrine. First things first, that's a big, dumb thing that Sukuna did that he did not need to do immediately. Weird move number one. He limited the range of Malevolent Shrine for what reason? He made it just bigger than Unlimited Void. Why? I don't know. Why didn't he make it at least 100 meters? Why not the 200 meter range? No clue. Why? Because Sukuna's messing around. He's having a good old time. And he's very specifically looking for something. And we see Gojo even point this out. You can go bigger than this, right? Meaning he does have some sort of understanding of what Malevolent Shrine is capable of. And of course, Sukuna extends Malevolent Shrine's range, and Gojo immediately Unlimited Voids back. However, he changes the property of his domain and allows it to be strong from attacks on the outside. And they immediately go back into swapping hands. However, we do get to see, once again, laying down the ground, well, I was about to say the concrete groundwork, but it's just the general groundwork. We're going to get to the concrete groundwork soon. Ryomen Sukuna and Satoru Gojo, while Sukuna's in a much physically weaker vessel than his hand for himself, is able to go hand for hand, bar for bar, band for band with Gojo Satoru. And we even see that he's actually able to tag Gojo when Gojo isn't able to tag him by using domain implication in their close quarters conflict. We see when Gojo's not using his curse technique and Sukuna's not using his curse technique, they're actually kind of even. And then the moment domain implication is used, he's able to tag Gojo and even knock him back a little bit with these little double impacts on his shoulders. Bada bing, bada boom. Gojo starts to amplify himself using his curse technique in order to try and get the jump on Sukuna. But Sukuna reacts, dodges, weaves, gets a punch, only to immediately use said punch as momentum in order to get in contact with Satoru Gojo and then manipulate the nature of his can't miss attack. Why? Because he knows about Satoru Gojo's abilities, turns off the can't miss attack inside of his domain, amplifies the can't miss attack outside the domain in order to shatter the hardened barrier. Now, the thing that is revealed here is ultimately, well, I'll cover it in a second, but I do want to lay it out here. Sukuna did not have to do this. This was explicitly the riskier approach. Why would he do that? Well, remember, he needs Malevolent Shrine to destroy Unlimited Void, but at the same time he needs Unlimited Void adapted to by Mahoraga. The reason he turns off his sure hit here and takes the riskier approach of getting in contact with Satoru Gojo in order to turn off Malevolent Shrine, rather than just, attacking the now reverse conditions of the barrier and shattering Unlimited Void from the inside, is because he was looking for that adaptation. And then the moment, of course, the domain shatters, Gojo's back in burnout, he's taking damage, and while the cuts are made shallow by falling blossom emotion, look at Sukuna. He kind of looks at him, he stands there, and proceeds to not do anything and let Gojo expand his domain again. This is nice. It's nice that he's able to do Falling Blossom Emotion, but as we know, Falling Blossom Emotion can be interrupted by a drop kick to the face. Y'all remember what happened to Nobito? So, if Sukuna actively decided to engage here with a Gojo using domain implication, and, well, he wouldn't even need domain amp at this point, because Gojo's curse technique is burnt out, then Gojo would not be able to hold Falling Blossom Emotion, who then be getting cut by full output Malevolent Shrine, and be back in the same scenario when his domain initially broke. But of course, then domain Gojo gets fancy and then makes the basketball domain. Now, this is the crux of where the chaos of this argument truly begins to be born. In the first part, you can definitely see Megan could have just wild out if he really felt like it. But here's where it gets contentious, tedious, and mind-numbing, considering how much chaos erupts inside the small ball, considering how little we see of small ball. But of course, the small ball is meant to do one very, very, very specific thing. It's meant to make the outer shell extremely dense, aka more resistant to Malevolent Shrine, aka more resistant so Satoru Gojo can fight better on the inside. But remember this, as is going to be mentioned soon, the Malevolent Shrine immediately gets active, and Gojo manages to break Sukuna, and by proxy, break the domain expansion, and by proxy, shatter Malevolent Shrine, and by proxy, put a hole in Sukuna's chest, which is enough to revert Sukuna down to a state where he can no longer maintain Malevolent Shrine. And of course, the two tie here. However, one thing that is unknown, but based on the actual damage that Sukuna takes versus the previous damage he didn't take when interacting with Gojo, while both were inside domains, it doesn't seem like Sukuna was using domain implication. Remember why he doesn't use domain implication throughout this entire encounter, except in very short bursts. Because extensive use of domain implication shuts down Maharaga's adaptation, which is the one thing that Sukuna was looking for throughout this entire encounter. Getting Maharaga adapted to Unlimited Void, just in case he may have fallen to it. Meaning that he cannot use domain amp. Meaning that this one close scenario where a Sukuna not using domain amp in order for Maharaga's adaptation would not have occurred if he was simply domain amping the entire time. Meaning that Gojo would have never broken his domain. Meaning that even Small Ball, the key to battling Malevolent Shrine, would not have worked if Sukuna was just domain amping the entire time. Because remember, the main reason Gojo was able to put a hole in Sukuna's chest is because he's using blue to amp himself and his punches. Domain amp would drain out all the activation of blue. Maybe not the force Gojo travels with, but at least the extra effects of blue that cause the concave suction effect that do extra damage. Yeah, that wouldn't do as much. Sukuna's domain would be maintained. And when they both shatter at the exact same time, Gojo's domain and Sukuna's domain wouldn't shatter. But Gojo's would, putting him in the exact same scenario as before, where he's now forced to either symbol domain and get attacked, or falling blossom motion and get attacked, and then have to face full output Malevolent Shrine until he either A, forcefully restores his curse technique to Small Ball again and try again, and or just sit there and take it. And which eventually he's gonna fall off and he's gonna fall out. And we eventually find out why. While this is a triumphant moment, it looks clean, it looks cool, it looks scrumbly-umptious, it looks fantastic, we see once again how their interactions generally go. Gojo starts absolutely tweaking out, running, chasing, activating his curse technique on Sukuna, trying to get that man down, dirty, diabolical, and devious. But ultimately, Sukuna basically reacts to everything. He blocks everything. He takes no damage, and this is the first hint for what the statement of 236 will eventually reveal and make concrete. Why? Sukuna's only activating curse techniques granted by the domain, and when the domain's internal external conditions were reversed, thereby decreasing the resistance to pressure from the inside, he took a risky move rather than trying to break the barrier from the inside. While our can't-miss attacks offset each other inside the domain, Sukuna has no means of attack other than amplification for defeating my limitless curse technique. That gives me a big advantage. Inside the domain, he also can't use an architectural structure to attack like before. If I had proceeded as if I had the advantage during the 3 minutes until the domain got destroyed from the outside. So why isn't Sukuna trying to use the 10 Shadows technique, specifically Maharaga, inside the domain? Could it be that Sukuna remembers my conversation with Megami and knows that I know about Maharaga? Is he afraid I'll waste it with a single move? The wheel spins, the nose drips. Now, of course at the time, we had no idea what this meant. But now we do know. The reason Sukuna took riskier moves, the reason Sukuna was not using domain implication the entire time, the reason that the domain even collapsed in the first place and Satoru Gojo had a chance to look dominant, is because Maharaga was in fact being used. The Ten Shadows technique was in fact being used. And if Sukuna just stood there and stonewalled implication the entire time, he would have beat Gojo. But Maharaga would have never gotten adapted, because the technique would be shut down. And obviously, Sukuna does not want that. So, he doesn't do it. But realize, from the initial Small Ball, if Sukuna just stood there and stonewalled, it wouldn't have happened. Because note, it always goes down to the wire. As we'll see in chapter 229, both go for another domain expansion boogaloo. Satoru Gojo wipes the bloody nose and casts, admittedly, in my opinion, like the coolest domain cast in the series, where he, like, instead of raising it up like this, he casts it down. That's mad metal. I love the angle of that. I can't wait to see that animated. But he casts the domain expansion, Sukuna casts the domain expansion, and they both go back into the small ball open barrier domain clash. And we see once again that Satoru Gojo is able to push Sukuna while Sukuna's not domain amping. And even then, Sukuna takes minimal damage from the interaction. Though you can definitely argue this is Sukuna's blood. So there's a bit, but as Gojo starts to dominate Sukuna, it's all when he's using his curse technique, throwing him around, knocking him around, pulling him into these punches, going crazy, going stupid. But realize, this cannot happen. Sukuna cannot be pulled into a wombo combo blue punch wombo. Well, I said wombo combo and a blue punch wombo combo, but that's not a thing. There's only one wombo combo. But that doesn't happen if Sukuna just domain amps. We know this for a fact. With a domain amp, he pulls out later at the last second against a red, which we know is stronger than blue. It still soaks up a lot of that damage. So if Sukuna's just domain amping here, what's Gojo meant to do? Just fight him? Without his curse technique? Essentially, remember, domain amping Sukuna just neutralizes both. They're essentially not fighting without a curse technique. Except Sukuna doesn't have a timer, like Gojo has a timer with his small ball. Small ball lasts 3 minutes. If small ball breaks after those 3 minutes and Sukuna's still just domain amping, then Gojo's just left without a curse technique and is forced to slice and dice. Or dodge around slicing and dicing. But as many have admitted in my previous videos talking about how Gojo could have won, Gojo's not going to just run. He's going to stay there and keep fighting. Like an idiot. That's like, well, to be fair, he wouldn't have much of a choice. Because Sukuna's not going to let him escape if he's not using the 10 shadows. And since he would, in this hypothetical timeline where he doesn't have access to, or he's just choosing not to use it and he's trying to fight Gojo head on, none of these interactions can happen. This interaction doesn't happen. And the punch that is used here in order to break the domain does not occur because it would be much weaker with domain amp. And based on how the damage is reflected, I don't think this is actually like what broke the domain. If you look at it closely here, Gojo uses the punch to pin Sukuna down, but then he raises two fingers like this, which can easily be extended to this, which is seemingly enough like red, and then we see the damage that broke Sukuna wasn't a punch to the chest like what's implied here, it's actually a blast from red that he blew off a chunk of Sukuna's face with. Which still wouldn't have done enough damage if, and only if, he was domain amping. As we'll see later, when he has Maharaga's wheel above his head. Are you starting to see the vision? Maharaga actively puts Sukuna in scenarios where he would take damage, when the easiest thing you could have done is just stonewall with domain amp. And notably, I don't mean just stonewalls and just stand there and like Chad take it, I just mean fight back. He doesn't do that for the most part. He lets himself get thrown around and tossed around because he needs the limited void's data to feed into Megumi's soul, to feed into Maharaga's adaptation. If he's domain amping, that won't happen. And thusly, he just don't do it. And then, when we get into another small ball clash... Oh, wait, actually, hold on. I do want to mention this. We don't get to see all 3 minutes and 11 seconds, or just the 3 minutes of their clashing. As Kusakabe says the same time again, what a nail-biter. Yeah, but that means Gojo's stronger fighter inside a domain, right? He can win this? Not necessarily, because Sukuna's not domain amping. And of course, they don't know this. Notably, I would use them as like, oh, well, look at that. They say Gojo's stronger, so he has to be stronger. They don't even know, as it's revealed later in the Goto fight, that Sukuna can do that. They didn't know he could domain amp inside a domain. It seems crazy. It seems impossible. It seems backwards. That's why Gojo was shocked when it happened at first. So they don't even know that. So they don't even know that Sukuna's just choosing, essentially, to allow himself to get beat around, battered, and do all this. And we even know he does this later, based on what he says in a chapter or two that we're about to leap into. But with it being the case, we see Sukuna punch Gojo back. They immediately go into another domain clash, but this time there's a slight second of delay. This delay causes Sukuna to get hit. Bada bing, bada boom, a limited void, bada bing, bada boom, big raga, bada bing, bada boom, that's it. And obviously, the whole reason this happens, and the whole reason if it did happen in a timeline where Megano wasn't using 10 shadows, he would lose here. You got me. I wholeheartedly agree. If he doesn't have Raga pre-adapted here because he was sitting there stonewalling the entire time, that means Raga wouldn't come out and save him. But at the same time, Sukuna would never be in this scenario if he wasn't initially taking the riskier option. He decided to sit there and allow himself to take more damage than what was necessary, because he didn't domain amp because he wanted Raga adapted, as we see later on in chapter 230. Maharaga's already adapted to Limited Void, and then we get the big, fat, juicy, scrumdiddlyumptious explanation in chapter 236 upon the reveal of Big Raga. And we get the explanation. Satoru Gojo knows Maharaga's moves. In the fight against Yorozu, Sukuna himself bore Maharaga's adaptation and thereby saw through construction. The can't miss commands that negated each other across 5 domain expansions, covered everything inside the domain for Gojo, and everything except himself inside the domain for Sukuna. But didn't cover can't miss attacks with regard to him. He took the hit from Limited Void 5 times and bore the burden of adaptation. And what he adapted to was a Limited Void in 0.01 seconds a moment ago. Impossible. Regardless of the wheels turning, Maharaga manifested after that. Did Sukuna bear the burden of adaptation? No. What did was Megami Soul. Nani Daisuke no Megami Soul's revealed? You look like you have something to say. Not really. I'm just glad you're fighting so hard. Not as hard as you. To be honest, I thought a curse technique effect like a Limited Void, which only activates inside a domain, would be difficult to handle. So I wanted, keyword is wanted, to rid you of that move first. While not using amplification inside a domain, I used 10 Shadows. Used 10 Shadows technique to have Fushiguro shoulder adaptation. As a result, I couldn't use curse techniques aside from what was given to the domain, but it was worth it. He explicitly explains that he just decided to not domain him for the adaptation. Now, if he just domain amps, Malevolent Shrine takes care of the rest. Because realize that ultimately, the scenario that comes up later in the chapter would not happen if Sukuna just played smarter. As Gojo reveals, but I bet you only had him shoulder the process of adaptation and not the results. Sukuna, neither you nor Megami Soul have adapted to Unlimited Void. If I open my domain again, you will have to bring out Maharaga. My next attack will end this. You can't open your domain again. Bang, bada boom, brain damage. Oh wow, look. And then Sukuna explains that this was all part of the plan. This is all according to Keikaku. As he says, by using reverse curse technique to repair a burnt out innate domain, you pushed yourself too far. Curse techniques are engraved somewhere around the right prefrontal cortex. You are destroying your brain with cursed energy and healing it with reverse curse technique to reset a burnt out curse technique. Nani Daisuke! No way! Doing that even once would have been too risky. The brain is a black box system, especially when it comes to curse techniques. It isn't that easy to heal. He almost died 4 times, and he just did it again. That makes 5. Thank you, Itadori. I thought Gojo was used to healing his brain. But the after effects are manifesting. Then Sukuna's better off for having done it less. There are limits compared to flesh and bone. Even if you open a domain, you'll either die or you won't have the precision to combat me. Next time, I'll close the domain with a barrier. You'll have nowhere to run. Then I'll dice you up and adapt to infinity as well. Then he summons Maharaga, bada bing, bada boom. But, hopefully, this quick run through the back half of the battle explains why I think, and many others think, that Gojo was not lying in 236 when he says, I'm not sure I could have beaten him even if he didn't have Megami's 10 Shadows. Because if he just played the battle differently, not worrying about Maharaga's adaptation, he's never put in a scenario where he can get hit by Limited Void. Because Gojo will never do enough damage with basic punches. He never will. He never will. Because remember, every other bit of charge up or every bit of decent power attacks that Gojo does will be covered by Domain Imp. And chapter 232 is pretty clearly laid out. Now I gotta pile it on. Then he'll think I'm only gonna use Azure. The timing will stop him from adapting to this. Curse technique reversal. Red. Sukuna, at the last second, notices that a red's about to come his way and activates Domain Amp. He Domain Amps, and he does take some damage, but ultimately, it's minimized. This is red. Red. The reversal of blue, which is stronger than blue. And Sukuna takes pretty minimal damage, and then heals from it. And sure, he can't fully negate Azure and Reversal Red, but he doesn't need to fully negate it. All he needs, as we see in all their previous clashes, is just a second longer. That's all it takes. For the initial one with Small Ball, all it takes is a second extra. Just 1 second. Small Ball collapsed and Gojo's in the exact same predicament where he was before. And while Gojo's dealing with the fact that he needs to suddenly force his brain to heal, as he's taking damage from Malevolent Shrine as well, as Sukuna's piling on with domain amplification, Sukuna's healed whatever little damage he did take from Gojo's severely weakened Azure punches. And his severely weakened Reds. And then they're back in the same cycle. So let's say Gojo does get another domain expansion off. Wow, crazy. Next level, exact same scenario. And then realize, with this being the case, if Sukuna never has to re-expand his domain, which he wouldn't, he would just be relying on the first one that he made, then he never has to worry about forcefully healing his brain on time. Meaning the scenario where he's 0.1 seconds late, where he has that barely a second of delay. Remember, he gets hit by Limited Void for a 1/10 of a second, not even a 10th, and a 100th of a second. That little slight bit away, slightly faster, does not happen. Because Sukuna never has to re-expand his domain, he never has to heal his brain. So then, it just comes to a fact that Gojo's output was consistently lowering. His brain was consistently taking damage. Every single domain he opened, he made himself weaker, and weaker, and weaker, and weaker. And we know Sukuna's output dropped after he took brain damage. But if he's just domain amping the entire time, which we know he should be able to do, the man has more than twice the curse energy of Yudokotsu, and efficiency directly compared to the 6 eyes. He lost less energy losing and using all the domains that he did than he did actually battling Satoru Gojo. So, if he sits there and stonewalls with Domain Amp, keeping the pressure on Satoru Gojo, forcing him to immediately heal his brain and then domain expansion again and again and again, and he just keeps forcefully shattering Gojo keeps having his domain forcefully shattered by Sukuna's Malevolent Shrine, this scenario never occurs. A scenario where he gets hit by that 0.1 seconds of Limited Void, and then eventually he just cuts Gojo down. Because realize, Sukuna stops here when Gojo goes to activate his domain again. He just stops. In this context, when this happens, when Gojo goes for his 5th domain after his first 4 were shattered, then he's going to have his brain explode. And then, just like here, he's going to collapse. Fall to one knee. And then, he's going to die! Because Sukuna's just going to keep the pressure on. All it would take is for Sukuna to focus and just remove his head. Or focus and punch him in the mouth. And focus or keep stomping him. Focus, just actively engage with him. And then it's fine. Gojo wouldn't be able to do anything. Because he'd be under the effects of Malevolent Shrine still. And unlike before, he's going to be forced to inferior options. He's going to be forced to use Simple Domain. He's going to be forced to use Falling Blossom Motion. Both of which we know won't work if Sukuna's just punching him in the mouth. Over and over and over and over and over again. That's why I believe Megane can win without the 10 Shadows. Because they've already shown clear relativity when Sukuna actually decides to engage with Gojo. And I think everyone agrees. I don't think there's a single person out there who thinks that Megane and Gojo are not equal in hand-to-hand. It's clear that they are. You take away both of their techniques and they're just equals. It just be like that. It's only when Gojo uses his technique against a Sukuna who's not defending against it with Domain Amp that he actually properly gets tossed around. By his technique, not by Gojo's hands. Because Gojo just doesn't do that, because they're equal. So you put them both in the even playing field. You take away the Limitless, because Sukuna's domain amping, and you take away the 10 Shadows, because Gojo's only using one curse technique. They are equal in hand-to-hand, but Gojo is living under a timer, while Sukuna doesn't have a timer. The moment Gojo's timer runs out, Sukuna just keeps attacking the pressure, now with the domain supporting that pressure. Gojo's forced to domain amp again. Not domain amp, domain expand again after forcefully healing his brain. Once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. 5th time hits, he experiences the brain damage after effects of consistently forcefully healing his domain expansion. And then he's trapped in a domain that's still active because Sukuna never had to re-amp his domain or re-up his domain because he's been domain amping the entire time, and Gojo has failed to do enough damage in any of the domain clashes because none of his abilities are working to their full potency, and Gojo's output keeps falling, and then he gets sliced to ribbons when he falls to his knees after his brain explodes. And then Megane wins. No 10 Shadows involved. Sukuna and Gojo both know they're fighting stupid. Well, Sukuna's fighting stupid. Gojo, he fights weird. But honestly, after making videos and having it explained in comment sections, I don't think Gojo really could have done much else. Mainly because he would just keep missing. That's the big issue. He would consistently keep missing, or you would have to make extrapolations about the Limitless that are weird. And that would include Sukuna just not domain amping through a lot of that too. Domain amp is the biggest issue here. If you remove either, I would agree that Sukuna can't beat Gojo as Mega. If you remove domain expansion, and it's just domain amp, yeah, he's not going to be able to beat Gojo. He's not going to be able to do enough damage. But if you remove domain amplification, oh, he's not going to be able to stonewall Gojo's attacks. He's going to take the damage. But since he has both, and since he has no reason to run out of either, when this scenario happens, as it inevitably will, because Gojo's not going to try and retreat, he's not going to try and run away and try and strategize out or move out the range of the 200 meter domain expansion and try to bait Sukuna out, since he wouldn't do that, since Sukuna has no motivation to chase him. As Gojo says, Sukuna's a challenger, but Sukuna doesn't care about that, he doesn't believe that. Gojo would have to be the one coming to press him. No matter what, Gojo's going to reach this point. He's going to reach a point where he burns out of domain expansions while Sukuna's still on his first one, and hasn't taken enough significant damage to destroy the first one. Then Gojo dies. Megana's relatively undamaged. His output should still be basically the same because he'll take no brain damage. He'll take very little actual physical damage too. His heart would never be crushed. He would never have to worry about taking a black flash from Gojo. None of that. None of that. His wins by a combination of domain expansion and domain amplification. That combo, stupid. Real stupid. It basically beats anyone else because it puts his opponent on a timer. And Gojo, strongest sorcerer of today, he's on a timer that he's inevitably going to lose against because he's going to keep domain expansioning and he's going to fall. Just like that. And honestly, that's it. I would cover more the back half of the fight, but once again, that's all predicated on Maharaga usage, and we just run into the same issue, where wherever Sukuna takes damage, it's because he's specifically not domain amping. Why is he not domain amping? Oh, because he's trying to attack for Maharaga. And then the second he does start to engage Satoru Gojo in actual hand-to-hand combat with domain expansion on the table or domain implication on the table, he keeps up relatively fine. He catches Gojo's punch when he tries to Shadow Clone Blitz him, and then he knocks him away. And then they're back to the regular adaptation. I feel like nothing else really changes. I hope this explains it. I mean, I'm not sure. That's the thing. I'm not sure how much further in depth I can go. Once again, this scenario just doesn't happen. None of the scenarios where Sukuna's put in a position where Maharaga has to come out or Aido has to come out, they don't happen if Sukuna doesn't use 10 Shadows and just fights smart. Not just fight smart. Honestly, just sitting there and stonewalling domain applications is the most boring way he could win, which is probably why he went about it in a more interesting way. But it's a way to win without 10 Shadows. So yeah, I wholeheartedly believe Gojo when he says, yeah, I don't think I could have beaten him, even if he didn't have Make Me 10 Shadows, based on how Gojo chose to fight. Now, if you can get in the comment section and prove there are other ways Gojo could have fought, if Sukuna took this kind of approach, where he was working more optimally without the use of the 10 Shadows, then we could talk. We can open a discussion. But just based on how Gojo's going to be forced to fight, based on how we see him fight in the entire 13-chapter battle, the whole 13-chapter battle, I ultimately think it's Digidestined that he would fall. But, of course, that's what I think. Please know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Do you guys think, even with my breakdown, ultimately there's no way, somehow, one way or another, even with all his attacks nerfed drastically by Domain Amp, Gojo Salto is going to somehow pull out a mystical, magical way to break Sukuna's Domain Barrier and break Shrine anyway? Let me know. Or do you guys just agree? And be like, oh yeah, Gojo was spitting 236. I can actually trust what he says. I don't know. Let me know in the comment section down below. Please leave, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, please leave Blue-Eyed King. Actually, no, because some people are going to say that anyway. That's the thing. I was going to just take what it... Leave... I'm trying to think. Leave adaptation failure. Leave adaptation failure in the comment section down below. I'd like to thank you so much for watching. Please remember to leave a like, share, comment, and subscribe. Make sure that little case post so you don't miss out on any videos that come to the channel. Also, I do happen to have a Patreon down below where you can support me for as low as $1, get a $1 a month. He links to exclusive videos, the content, and more. You'll also now become a member of the channel for as low as $3 a month to get the same perks and more. So those perks will include the live reaction to the very next chapter of Jujutsu Kaisen, and free variations of all my videos, and if you become a $25 patron or a $25 member, you can order whatever video you want. Also, I do have a link to my Ko-Fi description down below where you can drop 5 beans for a short video, 25 beans for a long video, or any beans at all. Any support is always greatly appreciated. Now, I'd like to thank you so much for watching once again, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. This is That with a Pencil, writing off. I'd like to give a thank you to our $3 members, Zera, Greyhound, Eternal Flame, NMA, Real Rare, Redwolf 4765, Paris Arnold, Astro, and Brandon Payne. And I'd like to give a thank you to our $5 patrons, Zombie Hunter, Sean, Midnight Lord 21, King, Meliodas, Kevin, Encarnacion, Josh Brown, and A+A. And I'd like to give a thank you to our $7 members, Autumn Mornings Lazo and Fine. And I'd like to give a thank you to our $10 members, Robbie Uchiha, Jay Warrior, and AZ Void. And I'd like to give a big ol' thank you to our $10 patrons, Michael Williamson, Joaquin Munoz, and Idem Okami. And I'd like to give a final gargantuan thank you to our $25 patron, Calvin Elder.